Beneath the waters near a small Greek island, divers found a corroded lump of bronze that looked almost worthless. But hidden inside were gears, dozens of them arranged with a precision no one expected from the ancient world. This was the Antikythera Mechanism, a machine from around 200 BC that could track the sun, the moon, calendars, and even eclipses. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy ancient mysteries like this. Beneath the dark water near Antikythera, something waits that should not quite exist. It is not the most beautiful object on the wreck, not the towering bronze statues, not the marble bodies lifted from the seabed like drowned gods, not the amphorae that once carried wine, oil, or wealth across the Mediterranean. It is smaller, uglier, and almost ruined beyond recognition, a lump of corroded bronze, fused with wood, sea minerals, and nearly 2,000 years of silence. At first glance, it looks like debris, a broken hinge, perhaps, a crushed instrument, a fragment from the fittings of a ship that went down in a storm and was forgotten by everyone except the sea. But inside that green-black mass are teeth, not animal teeth, not the teeth of a weapon, but gear teeth, cut into bronze wheels with a precision that feels strangely out of place. They belong to a machine made around the 2nd or 1st century BC, a machine that can follow the movements of the sun and moon, track calendars, predict eclipses, and translate the sky into turning metal. What survives in the record suggests that someone in the ancient Greek world built a compact model of time itself, then placed it aboard a ship that never reached its destination. The mystery begins not with a scholar at a desk, but with men diving for sponges in 1900 descending in heavy suits into water deep enough to crush the breath from a careless body. They find a wreck on the slope of the seabed, scattered with luxury cargo. It looks like a graveyard of art limbs, faces, torsos, jars, timber, metal. The divers are not searching for a lost computer. No one is. The idea would have sounded absurd. Ancient machines are expected to be simple, useful things, pulleys, pumps, screws, cranes, perhaps clever automata in temples and royal courts. But this object is different. It is not muscle. It is memory. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the Antikythera Mechanism is not simply an artifact. It is a rupture in expectation. It forces a quieter, more unsettling question: how much of the ancient world has disappeared not because it never existed, but because bronze was melted down, wood decayed, libraries burned, ships sank, and only one impossible fragment happened to survive. For decades, the mechanism resists understanding. Its fragments are too corroded, its gears too damaged, its inscriptions too faint. Scholars still debate parts of its design, its exact origin, and the identity of the workshop that made it. Yet the broad truth is no longer in doubt. This was a real machine, made by real ancient hands, using real astronomical knowledge. It was not magic. It was not alien. It was something more interesting: human intelligence, compressed into bronze, hidden in a wreck and almost lost forever. The first strange thing about it is not that the Greeks knew the sky. They had watched the heavens for centuries, learning from Babylonian records, Egyptian calendars, and their own mathematical traditions. The strange thing is that someone decided the sky could be mechanized. The wandering moon, the solar year, eclipse cycles, festival calendars, even the uneven pace of lunar motion could be represented by wheels turning within wheels. A user could turn a handle and watch time move. And this is where the object becomes haunting. The mechanism does not come from a world of ignorance waiting for modernity to arrive. It comes from a world of sailors, mathematicians, philosophers, craftsmen, merchants, slaves, patrons, collectors, and conquerors. A world where knowledge travels along the same routes as wine jars, statues, and war loot. The ship near Antikythera carried luxury goods, probably moving through a Mediterranean increasingly dominated by Rome. Somewhere in that cargo was a device that belonged to a much older dream to bring the heavens down into the hand. The sea preserved it badly, but preservation is rarely generous. Most ancient technology is gone because the materials were valuable or fragile. Bronze could be recast, wood could rot, papyrus could crumble. A machine like this, if kept in a house, school, workshop, or sanctuary, might have vanished without leaving even a stain. Its survival required catastrophe. A ship had to sink. The object had to be buried. The sea had to hide it from looters, smelters, and ordinary reuse. Then, nearly 2 millennia later, divers had to stumble upon it. No single explanation fully accounts for the shock it produced. It is not merely old. Many things are old. It is not merely clever. Antiquity is full of cleverness. The Antikythera Mechanism unsettles because it is evidence of a technological path that did not continue in any simple way. It hints at workshops capable of work so refined that, for a long time, historians struggled to believe what they were seeing. It shows that the ancient world could build devices of mathematical subtlety, yet it did not produce a visible tradition of similar surviving machines. The result is not a fantasy of lost superscience, but a more fragile and more believable mystery. A culture may reach extraordinary heights in certain places, under certain conditions, and still leave almost nothing behind. The mechanism is often called the world's oldest known analog computer. The phrase is useful, but slightly dangerous. It can make the device sound modern, as though it were a laptop trapped in a wooden box. It was not. It had no electricity, no software, no screen in the modern sense. Its logic was mechanical. Its memory was built into gear ratios. Its display was made of pointers, dials, scales, inscriptions, and cycles. It computed by moving. It answered not with digits, but with position. Turn the handle and the heavens advance. In that motion is the beginning of the story, a machine from roughly 2,000 years ago that does not belong to myth, yet feels almost mythic because so much around it has vanished. The wreck gives us a single surviving witness. The rest must be reconstructed from fragments, inscriptions, mathematics, historical context, and patient doubt. The evidence remains incomplete. But even incomplete, it is enough to change the atmosphere of the ancient Mediterranean. It makes the past feel less distant, and also less recoverable. Somewhere, someone understood enough to build this. Somewhere, a patron valued it enough to possess it. Somewhere, a ship carried it across dangerous water. Then the water closed, and for almost 2,000 years, the bronze ghost slept. The sea that swallows the Antikythera ship is not an empty blue space between lands. It is a crowded, nervous, glittering world of routes, ambitions, hazards, and exchanges. To understand why a machine of the heavens might be aboard a vessel moving through these waters, the Mediterranean has to be seen not as a barrier but as a kind of restless road. In the centuries before the wreck, ships stitched together Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, Syria, Sicily, Rhodes, Crete, Italy, and the islands that rise between them like stepping stones. Some carry grain, some carry soldiers, some carry slaves, Some carry statues, books, spices, perfumes, glass, silver, and scientific instruments meant for people wealthy enough to own beautiful things and educated enough to admire difficult ones. By the time the mechanism is made, the old world of independent Greek city-states has already been transformed. Alexander's conquests have opened vast corridors of exchange, and after his death, Hellenistic kingdoms compete not only with armies, but with libraries, observatories, workshops, and royal displays of learning. Alexandria grows into a magnet for scholars. Rhodes becomes famous for navigation, philosophy, and astronomy. Pergamon builds collections and monuments. Cities across the eastern Mediterranean cultivate a culture in which mathematics, geometry, astrology, calendar science, and mechanical invention can serve power as well as curiosity. Knowledge is not floating freely above society. It has patrons, institutions, rivalries, and practical uses. A ship moving through this world can carry more than cargo. It can carry the consequences of conquest and the taste of elites. Roman power is spreading eastward, and Greek art becomes an object of intense desire in Italy. Marble statues, bronze figures, fine vessels, furniture, and books move west. Some are bought, some are commissioned, some are taken. The evidence remains incomplete for the exact voyage of the Antikythera wreck, but the cargo suggests luxury on a grand scale. This is not the load of a modest coastal trader carrying onions and rope. It belongs to a world in which wealth gathers objects from older centres of culture and transports them toward new centres of power. And yet ships remain fragile things. The Mediterranean can look gentle from a distance, but ancient sailors know it as a living danger. Winds rise suddenly between islands, currents squeeze through channels, rocky coasts offer shelter and death in equal measure. A captain must read clouds, stars, landmarks, seasons, and the behaviour of water. Navigation is a craft of memory and calculation, but also of humility. No machine, however clever, can make the sea obedient. Somewhere near Antikythera, between the Peloponnese and Crete, this ship meets conditions it cannot survive. What goes down with it is a small museum of the late Hellenistic world. The mechanism belongs naturally to this world of movement. It is often tempting to imagine such an object sitting alone in a philosopher's study, isolated from commerce and politics. But ancient science is not sealed away from trade. Astronomy matters to calendars, religious festivals, agriculture, navigation, astrology, and civic identity. Mechanical skill matters to siege engines, water devices, automata, temple wonders, and elite display. A device that can model the heavens is both an intellectual instrument and a prestige object. It says something about its maker, but also about its owner. It belongs to a society where to possess knowledge can also mean to possess status. The surprising detail is that ancient people did not necessarily separate usefulness from wonder in the way modern categories often do. A mechanism could teach, calculate, impress, and delight at once. Greek writers describe devices that move automatically, sing, pour wine, open temple doors, or imitate living beings. Some descriptions are difficult to evaluate, and scholars still debate how common such machines were outside royal and sacred settings, but the broader tradition is real enough. Hellenistic engineers understand gears, screws, water pressure, balances, and complex mechanical arrangements. The Antikythera mechanism does not appear from nowhere. It appears from a culture that already knows how to turn abstract thought into crafted motion. Still, There is a difference between knowing gears exist and building a compact astronomical computer. The mechanism requires not only metalworking skill, but a decision about what the cosmos is. It assumes that celestial cycles can be represented numerically. It assumes that prediction can be built into hardware. It assumes that time is not merely experienced, but patterned. This is a deeply Hellenistic idea, shaped by Greek geometry and Babylonian long-term astronomical observation. The result is not one civilization's achievement alone. It is the product of a connected world, where data, methods, and instruments travel farther than any single city's walls. On the docks of a Hellenistic harbour, the human mixture would have been dense and loud. Sailors shout over cargo, porters carry amphorae and timber, merchants argue over weights, taxes, and credit, officials record goods, priests mark festival days, philosophers and tutors move between patrons, slaves do much of the labour that makes elite refinement possible. In some workshop not far from this world, a craftsman cuts bronze teeth with care so exact that a mistake would ripple through the heavens on the dial. The device is an object of learning, but it is also an object of labour. The invisible hands behind it are not only those of astronomers but of metal workers, carpenters, scribes, and polishers. What survives in the record suggests that the mechanism was housed in a wooden case, with inscriptions that helped explain its displays. This matters because it was not simply a hidden set of gears. It was meant to be read and operated. Someone expected a user to understand labels, cycles, and pointers. The machine was a bridge between specialized knowledge and guided use. It may have belonged to a teacher, a wealthy collector, an astronomer, or a member of the educated elite. No single explanation fully accounts for its presence on the ship, but its setting among luxury goods makes one thing clear: this was not scrap. It was valued. The Mediterranean trading world also explains why the mechanism could be both extraordinary and vulnerable. Routes spread knowledge, but they also expose it to disaster. A manuscript copied in Alexandria can end up in Rome. A statue made in Greece can decorate an Italian villa. A device built in Rhodes or elsewhere can cross open water in a merchant vessel. The same network that preserves culture by moving it also destroys culture when a ship founders. Every wreck is a collapsed connection. Every cargo on the seabed is a sentence interrupted. By the late 2nd and early 1st centuries BC, the Eastern Mediterranean is living through a shift in gravity. Greek intellectual traditions remain powerful, but Roman military and political dominance is reshaping ownership. Objects are moving westward, sometimes as trophies of conquest, sometimes as commodities in a market hungry for Greek refinement. The Antikythera ship may belong to this movement. If so, the mechanism is not only a scientific artifact, it is part of a larger story of transfer, appropriation, admiration, and loss. There is a quiet irony here. The machine was built to make cycles predictable, to show that eclipses and months and years return according to order, but the world carrying it was anything but stable. Kingdoms fell, cities changed masters, libraries depended on patrons. Workshops vanished when demand shifted or violence arrived. A device that embodied celestial regularity travelled through a human landscape of uncertainty. Then it entered the one place where human plans end abruptly: the bottom of the sea. The wreck near Antikythera is therefore not an isolated accident. It is a snapshot of a world in motion. Caught at the instant motion fails. The ship's cargo speaks of wealth, empire, scholarship, craftsmanship, and danger all at once. The mechanism lies among these traces like a secret folded into the ruins of trade. It is a product of the Mediterranean's brilliance, but also a victim of its risks. To follow it further, the story must descend from the wide map of routes and kingdoms to the cold slope where sponge divers first saw shapes rising from the sand, and where one corroded lump waited to become the most surprising machine ever recovered from antiquity. The wreck near Antikythera returns to history through exhaustion, chance, and the dangerous work of men who know the sea with their bodies before anyone knows it with instruments. In the spring of 1900, sponge divers from the island of Symi are travelling through the Aegean when bad weather forces them toward Antikythera, a small, rugged island lying between Crete and the Peloponnese. It is the sort of place that seems almost designed to interrupt a voyage rocky, wind-beaten, close to major sea lanes, and surrounded by waters that can turn from clear invitation to trap without ceremony. The divers are not archaeologists. They're working men in heavy suits, with copper helmets, weighted boots, air hoses, and a profession that offers both livelihood and injury in generous measure. One diver descends and finds what at first seems impossible human forms scattered on the seabed. The report that he has seen bodies among the rocks is chilling, but the dead are not recent sailors. They are statues, bronze and marble figures lying where the ship has broken and spilled its cargo. In the wavering underwater light, a bronze arm, a face, or a torso can look unnervingly alive. The sea gives everything movement. Sand shifts. Fish pass through empty eyes. A statue partly buried in sediment can seem like a person trying to rise. It is an image almost too cinematic, but it comes from the practical world of salvage, where wonder is immediately entangled with risk. Soon the Greek authorities become involved, and one of the earliest large-scale underwater archaeological recoveries begins, though the methods belong more to salvage than to modern archaeology. The divers bring up statues, coins, amphorae, glassware, pottery, furniture fittings, and other fragments of a luxury cargo. The work is brutally difficult. The depth is severe for the equipment of the time, and decompression sickness, then poorly understood, shadows every descent. Men suffer paralysis. One diver dies. The wreck yields treasures, but it takes payment. This is a lesser-known part of the Antikythera story before the mechanism becomes a symbol of ancient genius. The site is already marked by modern human cost. The first celebrated finds are not gears, they are bodies of art. The Antikythera Ephebae, a bronze statue of a young man, emerges from the sea in pieces and becomes one of the great bronzes of antiquity. Marble sculptures come up damaged by water and time, some eroded into ghostly forms, while bronze pieces, protected in different ways by corrosion and burial, sometimes preserve a startling presence. These objects fit comfortably into what early 20th century scholars expect from a major ancient wreck. They speak of Greek artistry, Roman collecting, wealthy patrons, and the movement of luxury objects. They are extraordinary, but not impossible. Then there are the lumps. Among the recovered materials are corroded bronze fragments that do not announce themselves clearly. They are stored, examined, and at first not understood. In a museum full of statues, inscriptions, and recognizable artifacts, a mineralized clump does not easily command attention. It seems almost unfair that the most intellectually explosive object from the wreck should look so unpromising. But this is often how archaeology works. The past does not present its secrets according to modern dramatic needs. Sometimes the thing that changes history arrives as an ugly fragment no one knows how to classify. The object that becomes known as the Antikythera Mechanism is first recognized only gradually. In 1902, as the fragments are being handled and studied, a gear wheel is noticed within one of the corroded pieces. That recognition changes the atmosphere around the find. A gear in an ancient artifact is not by itself unbelievable, but the number, arrangement, and delicacy of the parts suggest something far more complex than a simple fitting. There are inscriptions too, faint letters on bronze surfaces, some too damaged to read, others hinting at astronomical meaning. The evidence remains incomplete, but already the object begins to separate itself from ordinary wreckage. At this stage, confusion is understandable. The mechanism has been crushed, broken, corroded, and scattered. Its wooden case has mostly disappeared, leaving traces and impressions rather than a complete frame. Bronze plates cling together. Gear teeth are hidden inside accretions. Parts that once moved freely are frozen into a compact archaeological knot. Imagine finding a shattered clock after 2,000 years under the sea, then trying to reconstruct not only how it looked, but what problem it was designed to solve. Now remove all similar examples for comparison. That is the problem the early investigators face. Scholars still debate details of the original salvage and the precise distribution of the mechanism fragments on the wreck, partly because underwater archaeology in 1900 was not documented with the standards used today. Objects were retrieved under hazardous conditions, often without the careful mapping that modern researchers would consider essential. This does not erase the value of the discovery, but it leaves gaps. The wreck is both generous and frustrating. It gives up enough to transform history, but not enough to answer every question neatly. The ship itself tells a story even in fragments. Coins and cargo help place the wreck broadly in the late Hellenistic period, often associated with the 1st century BC, while the mechanism itself may have been made earlier, perhaps around the 2nd century BC. The exact dating remains a matter of scholarly refinement, because objects on ships can be old when they travel. A statue may be decades or centuries old before it is transported. A device may have been used, repaired, inherited, sold, or collected before it sinks. What survives in the record suggests a vessel carrying valuable goods through a Mediterranean shaped by Roman appetite for Greek culture. But the ship's full itinerary is lost. There is something deeply fitting about the way the mechanism is discovered among artworks. The ancient world did not divide beauty, science, and prestige as cleanly as later categories sometimes imply. The same elite environment that admired sculpture might also admire a machine that displayed the order of the heavens. A bronze youth and a bronze gear are different expressions of skill, but both belong to cultures that value form, proportion, and mastery. One imitates the body, the other imitates the sky. The wreck preserves them together, as though the ship carried both the human figure and the cosmic pattern, both lost in the same storm. The divers, of course, cannot know this. To them, the wreck is a dangerous field of salvage. The machine is not yet a machine in the public imagination. It is an encrusted puzzle awaiting technologies that do not yet exist. X-rays, gamma radiography, computed tomography, advanced imaging, digital modeling, and refined epigraphic study will come later. For now, the mechanism sits at the edge of comprehension, noticed but not decoded. It is a mystery in the most literal sense, something seen, but not yet revealed. No single explanation fully accounts for the long delay between discovery and understanding. Part of it is technological. The gears are hidden inside corrosion, and the inscriptions are faint. Part of it is conceptual. Historians must be ready to believe that such a device could exist before they can interpret it properly. Expectations shape vision. If the ancient world is imagined as capable only of simple machinery, then a complex geared computer seems like an anomaly, perhaps even an intrusion. But if the Hellenistic world is understood as mathematically ambitious and mechanically inventive, the object becomes less impossible, though no less astonishing. The wreck near Antikythera thus becomes a threshold. On one side lies the sea-story divers, statues, storm, salvage, death, treasure. On the other side lies the intellectual story gears, inscriptions, cycles, astronomical theory, and the reconstruction of a lost mechanical tradition. The corroded fragments stand between these worlds. They have to be rescued twice, first from the seabed, and then from misunderstanding. As the early fragments rest in Athens, the statues attract admiration and the mechanism waits in obscurity, carrying inside it a pattern no one can yet fully read. Its bronze teeth are silent, but they still hold the memory of motion. The ship has stopped. The hands that made the device are gone. The owner is nameless, and the sea has done its slow work. Yet the machine has not entirely died. Beneath the corrosion, its wheels still point toward an ancient decision so bold it almost feels modern. The heavens can be calculated, and calculation can be made to turn. The first glimpse of gear teeth inside the Antikythera fragments does not solve the mystery. It deepens it. A gear is a simple idea in principle. One toothed wheel turns another. Motion passes from one part to the next, and the ratio between teeth can make movement faster, slower, reversed, or transformed. But the gears inside the corroded bronze are not crude, oversized pieces meant for a mill or hoist. They are small, carefully cut, and arranged in a way that suggests calculation. Their purpose is not to lift stone, crush grain, or wind rope. Their purpose seems to be intellectual. They are made to represent relationships. That is what makes the object so difficult to absorb. Ancient machines are not unknown. The Greek and Roman worlds have water clocks, pumps, screws, cranes, presses, odometers, catapults, and theatrical devices. Engineers understand leverage, pressure, rotation, and balance. Yet the Antikythera mechanism points toward another category, a machine that embodies mathematical astronomy. It is not simply useful in the physical world. It is useful because it imitates an invisible order. The device turns numbers into motion, and motion into knowledge. Early investigators can see enough to be startled, but not enough to reconstruct the whole. The mechanism is broken into major fragments and smaller pieces. Bronze plates are fused together by corrosion products. Gear wheels lie partly hidden. Inscriptions cling to damaged surfaces like whispers. Some letters are visible, others are buried under mineral growth or lost entirely. The object has the frustrating quality of a burned manuscript. It plainly once said something, but it refuses to speak easily. One of the most important early realizations is that this is not a modern object accidentally mixed into ancient finds. That suspicion may seem strange now, but it is understandable. The mechanism looks so technologically unexpected that contamination has to be considered. Yet its archaeological context, corrosion, inscriptions, and association with the wreck all support its antiquity. It belongs with the ship. It belongs with the late Hellenistic world. What is out of place is not the artifact itself, but the modern assumption that such an artifact should not have existed. As the gears become more visible, a second recognition follows. The machine is compact. This is not a vast public monument like a tower clock, nor a workshop mechanism spread across a bench. It was likely housed in a portable wooden case, with front and back dials. The surviving fragments suggest something roughly the size of a small box rather than a building-sized instrument. That scale matters. Precision is harder when space is limited. the maker has to organize layers of wheels, axles, pointers, scales, and inscriptions into a coherent object that a user can operate. The mechanism is not just clever in concept, it is clever in packaging. The gears themselves are made from bronze sheet, with triangular teeth cut around their edges. They are not identical, and they do not meet modern industrial standards, but they are astonishing for their purpose. Their ratios encode astronomical cycles. A wheel with one number of teeth drives another with a different number, producing a relationship that can approximate a celestial period. This is where mathematics enters the metal. A gear ratio can become a theory. A count of teeth can become a calendar. In a world without electronic computation, the machine stores knowledge physically. The lesser-known surprise is that the mechanism is not merely a display of the obvious solar year and lunar month. As later study reveals, it includes sophisticated cycles known from ancient astronomy, including the Metonic cycle of 235 lunar months in 19 years and the Saros eclipse cycle of 223 lunar months. These are not casual observations. They come from long traditions of watching the sky, comparing records, and discovering that celestial events repeat with rough but usable regularity. The mechanism's maker, or the intellectual tradition behind him, has inherited centuries of accumulated sky knowledge and translated it into gears. But in these early stages, much remains uncertain. Scholars still debate how many gears the complete mechanism originally had, how all of them were arranged, and what some missing displays may have shown. The surviving device is not complete enough to remove all doubt. Some parts are known because they survive. Others are inferred because a gear train requires them, an inscription refers to them, or a dial makes sense only with a missing pointer. This is one of the central disciplines of reconstructing the mechanism separating the bronze that exists from the bronze that must once have existed, and admitting where the boundary is not perfectly clear. The inscriptions become crucial because they show that the mechanism was not an anonymous tangle of wheels. It had explanatory text. Some inscriptions appear to describe the behavior of the displays, almost like a user's guide. Others list astronomical or calendrical information. This is a remarkable feature. A machine can be mysterious because its parts are hidden, but labels bring it closer to everyday use. They suggest that the device was meant to be understood by someone who may not have built it. It was a teachable object, perhaps an educational instrument, perhaps a demonstration piece, perhaps a possession of someone deeply invested in astronomy. And yet, even with inscriptions, the device remains partly mute. Bronze letters only a few millimeters tall are not generous after 2,000 years underwater. Corrosion distorts them. Breaks interrupt words. Missing fragments remove context. Reading them requires not just eyesight, but epigraphy, imaging, patience, and knowledge of ancient technical language. A letter restored incorrectly can alter a phrase. A phrase interpreted too confidently can distort a reconstruction. The evidence remains incomplete, and careful researchers have to live with that incompleteness rather than smoothing it away. The more the mechanism is studied, the more it begins to challenge a simple story of technological progress. Modern people often imagine invention as a staircase, simple tools at the bottom, complex machines higher up, each era climbing predictably toward the present. The Antikythera mechanism does not fit that staircase comfortably. It suggests a peak of specialized craftsmanship and theoretical knowledge that appears, survives in one damaged example, and then disappears from the archaeological record for many centuries. This does not mean history went backward in every way. It means technological traditions are fragile. They require demand, training, materials, institutions, and continuity. Remove enough of those, and even brilliant techniques can fade. There is also a more intimate mystery inside the gears. A machine like this requires collaboration between kinds of knowledge that do not always leave equal traces. Astronomers can define the cycles, mathematicians can express relationships, craftsmen can cut the gears and assemble the case, scribes can engrave the instructions, patrons can pay for the work, users can turn the handle and interpret the displays. The final object hides the social network that made it possible. It gives us bronze, but not names. It gives us ratios, but not the workshop conversation. It gives us the result, but not the failures that must have preceded it. No single explanation fully accounts for how such a refined instrument emerged in precisely the form that survives. It may have roots in earlier astronomical models now lost. It may represent a mature tradition rather than a one-off miracle. It may have been made in a centre like Rhodes, where astronomy and mechanical skill were both cultivated, though the exact origin remains debated. What can be said with confidence is that it belongs to a world capable of far more mechanical subtlety than its surviving artifacts usually reveal. That realization changes the emotional force of the mechanism. At first, it seems like an impossible exception. Then, slowly, it becomes evidence for a missing background. The gears are not only gears, they're shadows cast by vanished workshops, vanished manuals, vanished instruments, vanished teachers, and vanished expectations. If this machine existed, what else existed and failed to survive? How many devices were melted down when bronze became more useful as coin, weapon, or statue? How many wooden cases rotted in damp storerooms? How many astronomical instruments were discarded when fashions changed or patrons died? The Antikythera fragments do not answer those questions directly. They cannot, but they force the questions to be asked. Their bronze teeth mark the point where the familiar ancient world opens into something stranger and more technical. They reveal that a person in antiquity could look up at the moon, understand that its motion follows patterns subtle enough to require mathematics, and then build those patterns into a box. The machine is still broken, its pointers no longer move. Its case is gone, its owner has vanished, but the gear teeth remain, and they are enough to show that the past was never as simple as it looked from the surface. The Antikythera mechanism does not yield its secrets in a single revelation. It is not an artifact that can simply be cleaned, opened, and understood. It has to be persuaded across generations by methods that grow more powerful as the 20th century turns into the 21st. Each new technique looks deeper into the same damaged bronze, and each time the machine becomes less like a curiosity and more like a designed instrument with a hidden architecture. The story of its reconstruction is therefore not only a story about ancient intelligence, it is also a story about modern patience. For years, researchers can see the outside of the fragments better than the inside. They can identify visible gears, count some teeth, examine inscriptions, and compare the object with known ancient instruments. But the mechanism's most important evidence is locked within corrosion. Bronze has fused with bronze, plates overlap, gear wheels are trapped in positions that may not reflect their original alignment. The sea has added its own casing of minerals, turning a delicate machine into something like a fossil. It is not dead in the ordinary archaeological sense. It is more like an animal preserved inside stone, where the bones remain, but only if the stone can be read. Early radiography begins to change that. X-ray imaging allows scholars to see gear wheels hidden inside the fragments without destroying them. Later, more advanced scanning reveals far more the number of teeth on gears, the positions of axles, the layering of plates and faint inscriptions invisible to the naked eye. The mechanism becomes a landscape of shadows. Researchers learn to read circular forms through corrosion to distinguish real gear teeth from damage, to identify holes where pins or axles once sat. Every small feature matters because the machine is not merely decorative. Its geometry is its meaning. One of the major figures in this long effort is Derek de Solla Price, whose work in the mid-20th century helps establish that the mechanism is a complex astronomical calculator. Price studies radiographs and proposes a model of gear trains designed to reproduce celestial cycles. Some details of his reconstruction are later revised as better imaging becomes available, but his larger insight is transformative. The object is not a navigational astrolabe. It is not a simple calendar. It is a geared computing device. It calculates relationships between cycles of the sun, moon, and eclipses. This is a crucial moment in the history of interpretation because it turns the mechanism from an anomaly into a problem that can be solved mechanically. If the gears compute, then their tooth counts are not random. They encode ratios. A gear with 64 teeth driving one with 38 teeth is not just hardware. It is a number relationship built into bronze. The challenge is to identify which relationships correspond to known astronomical cycles. Once that happens, the mechanism begins to speak a language halfway between mathematics and machinery. Later research teams use high-resolution X-ray computed tomography and surface imaging to see the fragments with unprecedented clarity. The scans reveal inscriptions buried under corrosion, including words and numbers that help identify dials and functions. They show that the back of the mechanism likely contains spiral displays, with pointers moving through tracks that represented long cycles. This is one of the most elegant surprises of the whole device. Instead of using a simple circular dial for everything, the maker uses spiral scales to fit large cycles into a compact space. A pointer could travel along a spiral groove, marking month after month across years, while a small subsidiary dial counted turns. It is a solution both practical and beautiful. The front face is more difficult because it is less completely preserved. What survives suggests a display for the zodiac and Egyptian calendar, with pointers for the sun and moon, and probably some representation of the moon's phase. Some reconstructions propose planetary displays as well, and scholars still debate how elaborate the original front may have been. The evidence remains incomplete, and this is where caution matters. The mechanism is astonishing enough without forcing every possible feature into certainty. Some ancient inscriptions seem to refer to planetary phenomena, and Greek astronomy certainly concerned itself with the planets. But how the mechanism displayed them remains one of the more contested areas. The back, by contrast, offers a firmer foundation. There, the Metonic cycle appears as a 235-month calendar cycle laid out in a spiral. The Saros cycle, important for eclipse prediction, appears in another spiral of 223 lunar months. These cycles are not inventions of the mechanism's maker. They are part of a deep astronomical inheritance, especially connected to Babylonian observational astronomy, where long records allowed patterns to be recognized across generations. The Greek achievement here is not merely knowing the cycles, it is mechanizing them in a compact user-operated instrument. A lesser-known detail is the way the mechanism incorporates calendars that are not simply universal abstractions. The month names on one of the dials appear to reflect a regional Greek calendar, possibly connected to Corinthian colonies or areas such as northwestern Greece. Though interpretations vary, this matters because the machine is not floating in a purely theoretical cosmos. It is tied to real civic time, to local names, festivals, and the lived experience of communities. The heavens are universal, but calendars are local. The mechanism bridges both. Reassembly is not literal in the sense of putting the original fragments back into a working box. The artifact is too fragile, too incomplete, and too precious. Instead, researchers build models, drawings, digital reconstructions, and modern replicas. These reconstructions test whether proposed gear trains actually work. A theory that looks convincing on paper may fail when the wheels collide. The ratios do not align, or the pointer cannot move as required. In this way, the mechanism forces scholars to think like ancient engineers. Every interpretation has to pass through the physical constraints of bronze, space, and motion. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of the research. The mechanism cannot be understood by one discipline alone. Archaeologists study context, epigraphers read inscriptions, historians examine ancient astronomy, mathematicians analyze cycles, mechanical engineers test gear trains, imaging specialists recover hidden details, conservators protect the fragments from further damage. No single explanation fully accounts for the object unless these fields are brought together. The machine itself demands collaboration, just as its original construction probably did. As the hidden structure emerges, the old image of the ancient world shifts again. The mechanism is not a loose collection of gears, nor a symbolic model made only for display. It has integrated systems. Turning one input appears to drive multiple outputs. The device coordinates different cycles that do not match neatly solar years, lunar months, eclipse periods, calendar months, and perhaps planetary motions. That coordination is the essence of computation. The machine does not simply show what someone already knows at a single moment. It allows a user to move forward or backward through time and see relationships unfold. The inscriptions deepen this sense of guided operation. Some text seems to describe what appears on the dials, including eclipse characteristics or calendrical information. The letters are small, precise, and technical. They suggest that the machine was not only made to impress but to instruct. A user could learn from it, perhaps under the guidance of someone trained, perhaps by reading the panels. The mechanism becomes a book that moves, or a cosmos that can be handled. It is not merely a calculation tool, it is a teaching device, a display of order, and possibly a prized possession. Yet the more complete the reconstruction becomes, the more poignant the missing parts feel. Many gears are gone, much of the front is lost. The wooden case survives only indirectly. The original pointers, knobs, and exterior appearance remain partly inferred. Scholars still debate details because the mechanism does not permit total certainty. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the artifact's power. What survives is enough to reveal brilliance, but not enough to remove mystery. The device remains suspended between demonstration and absence. The Antikythera mechanism is therefore reassembled in two senses. It is reassembled as a machine through scans, tooth counts, gear ratios, and models. But it is also reassembled as an idea. The modern world slowly rebuilds the possibility that the ancient world possessed a more sophisticated mechanical tradition than the evidence usually suggests. Each scan does not merely reveal hidden bronze. It restores a little confidence in ancient craft. It reminds us that historical loss is not evenly distributed. Stone temples survive. Bronze machines do not. Monumental ruins dominate imagination. Small technical objects vanish. By the time modern imaging has done its work, the mechanism is no longer a strange lump from a wreck. It is damaged but legible computer of cycles, a machine whose logic can be followed even when its body is incomplete. Its surviving gears show that ancient makers could coordinate astronomy and mechanics at a level unmatched in surviving artifacts for many centuries. Its inscriptions show that it was meant to communicate. Its compact design shows that the maker was solving practical engineering problems, not merely sketching philosophical ideas. And still, the central wonder remains simple. A hand once turned a handle, and the sky moved inside a box. Not the real sky, of course, but a disciplined bronze shadow of it, months advancing, years turning, eclipses approaching, the moon shifting in phase, civic time and celestial time bound together by teeth. The reconstruction lets that motion return, not fully, not with the original sound or touch, but enough to make the ancient intention visible. The machine was not built to sleep beneath the sea. It was built to make time move where human eyes could follow it. To understand the Antikythera mechanism as its maker intended, the machine has to be imagined not as a museum object, fixed under glass, but as something alive in the hand. A user turns a small handle or knob, and the motion passes inward. One wheel moves another, teeth engage, axles rotate, pointers creep across engraved scales. Time, which ordinarily feels like a river carrying human beings forward without consent, becomes something that can be advanced, reversed, inspected, and compared. The device does not stop time. It does something more subtle. It turns time into a pattern. At the heart of that pattern is the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the calendar. For any ancient society, this relationship matters deeply because nature does not divide itself into neat civic units. A day is obvious enough, though even that can be measured in different ways. A solar year governs seasons, agriculture, sailing conditions, and the return of heat and cold. A lunar month governs the visible swelling and fading of the moon. But 12 lunar months do not equal one solar year. The sky refuses administrative tidiness. If a city builds its calendar only on the moon, festivals drift through the seasons. If it builds only on the sun, the moon's phases lose their calendrical role. Ancient calendar makers live inside this tension, and the mechanism embodies one of the great solutions to it. The Metonic cycle, one of the machine's central systems, expresses a striking near equivalence. 235 lunar months fit very closely into 19 solar years. This does not mean the heavens are perfectly locked like a modern machine. The match is approximate, and ancient astronomers knew that corrections and conventions were still needed. But it is good enough to become a powerful calendrical framework. It allows lunar months and solar years to be reconciled over a long repeating cycle. On the Antikythera mechanism, this cycle is not written only as an abstract number. It is laid out as a spiral display on the back of the device, month after month, year after year, compacted into a form a pointer can traverse. This spiral is one of the most revealing design choices in the machine. A simple circle can show a repeating year, but 235 months require more space. Rather than making an enormous dial, the maker winds the scale inward or outward like a path. The pointer follows the spiral, and a small subsidiary indicator can show which turn of the spiral is active. It is a spatial solution to a temporal problem. The user sees long time folded into a small area. What might otherwise require tables, memory, or written calculation becomes visible in motion. The calendar on the mechanism is also not purely celestial. It includes month names, and those names belong to human communities. This is easy to overlook because the gears feel so mathematical, but the machine is not just about astronomy in the abstract. It connects the sky to the schedules of cities, sanctuaries, and festivals. The moon does not care what a month is called. A city does, a ritual does, a magistrate does, a farmer, a sailor, a priest, and a creditor may all care for different reasons. The mechanism's calendar system brings the clean logic of cycles into contact with the messy life of society. What survives in the record suggests that one of the calendar schemes on the device may reflect a regional Greek calendar rather than the calendar of Athens, whose fame often dominates modern imagination. This is a small but important reminder that the Greek world is not a single uniform culture. It is a mosaic of cities, colonies, dialects, cults, and local timekeeping systems. The Antikythera Mechanism seems to arise from that wider Greek world, where intellectual traditions may be shared across regions, but civic calendars remain proudly particular. A machine can model the cosmos, yet still speak in local month names. The sun's motion would likely have appeared on the front display, moving against the zodiac and calendar scale. The zodiac gives a celestial frame, dividing the sun's annual path through familiar constellational signs. The Egyptian calendar, with its regular 365-day year, may also have been represented, offering another timekeeping structure. Ancient astronomers often valued the Egyptian calendar because its fixed structure made calculations simpler than the more variable civic calendars. The mechanism may therefore combine different kinds of time: the mathematical, the civic, the seasonal, and the observational. Each one answers a different human need. The moon is more complicated, and its deeper story belongs to the next stage of the machine's mystery. But even at the level of the basic calendar, lunar motion dominates the device. The phases of the moon are among the most visible cycles in the sky. They regulate night brightness, religious observances, and the emotional texture of time. A new moon can begin a month. A full moon can illuminate travel or ritual. For sailors, moonlight matters. For farmers and priests, lunar timing can matter. For astrologers, it matters intensely. The mechanism's ability to coordinate lunar months with solar years is therefore not a decorative feature. It is practical, intellectual, and symbolic all at once. There is a lesser-known elegance in how ancient calendrical science depends on accumulated patience. The Metonic cycle was not something anyone could discover by glancing at the sky for a season. It required long observation, records, comparison, and the willingness to think beyond a single lifetime. Much of this tradition owes a debt to Babylonian astronomy, where generations of observers recorded celestial phenomena with extraordinary discipline. Greek astronomers inherited, adapted, debated, and mathematized such knowledge. The Antikythera Mechanism turns that inheritance into an object. It is, in a sense, a physical archive of remembered skies. Scholars still debate how widely such knowledge circulated and exactly who the intended user of the mechanism was. It may have served as an educational tool, allowing an instructor to demonstrate cycles. It may have been a prestige object for an elite owner fascinated by astronomy. It may have helped with calendrical reckoning or astrological timing. These uses are not mutually exclusive. In antiquity, a scientific instrument could be useful, beautiful, and socially impressive at the same time. The evidence remains incomplete, but the mechanism's inscriptions and displays suggest that it was meant to be operated with understanding, not merely admired from a distance. The idea of a calendar may sound ordinary now, because calendars surround modern life so completely that they become invisible. But in the ancient world, a calendar is a negotiation between heaven, power, religion, and memory. It tells people when to plant, when to sail, when to gather, when to honour the gods, when debts come due, when officials take office, when games are held, and when the year itself is corrected. A calendar is not just a measurement system, it is a structure of civilization. To mechanize a calendar is to place part of that structure into gears. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional force of seeing that structure embodied in bronze. Part of the force comes from the precision, part comes from the age, part comes from the fact that the mechanism survives alone, like a voice from a vanished workshop. But part also comes from the recognition that ancient people lived under the same sky and faced the same mismatch between natural cycles and human order. The sun returns, the moon returns, seasons return. Yet none of them fit perfectly together. Human beings respond by counting, naming, adjusting, and building. The Antikythera Mechanism is one of the most sophisticated surviving examples of that response. It does not merely say that 19 years contain 235 lunar months. It makes the relationship move. It lets a person travel through the cycle by touch. The user can advance time and see how celestial and civic patterns unfold together. This is why the machine deserves the word computer if the word is handled carefully. It computes not through electricity but through constrained motion. Its answers are not stored in code but in the sizes of wheels, the positions of teeth, the engravings on dials, and the alignment of pointers. There is something almost philosophical about that. The machine suggests a universe where complexity can be made intelligible, not perfectly, but enough. The heavens may be vast, distant, and divine in cultural imagination, yet their cycles can be approximated by bronze gears inside a box. This does not diminish the sky. It intensifies the achievement. The maker is not reducing the cosmos to a toy. He is showing that human reason can find rhythm in what seems unreachable. And still, uncertainty remains. Some parts of the calendar display are damaged. Some inscriptions are fragmentary. Some reconstructions may change as new readings are proposed. Scholars still debate details of the front dial, the handling of planetary information, and the full range of displays. But the central calendrical achievement is secure enough to stand this machine, coordinates solar and lunar time through long cycles, in a way that no other surviving ancient device matches. The wreck that carried it was ruled by weather, chance, and human commerce. The mechanism inside it was ruled by ratios. That contrast is part of its lasting beauty. On the sea, time could be violent and unpredictable, a storm rising, a hull breaking, a voyage ending in minutes. Inside the machine, time could be patient, circular, and legible, months nested in years, years nested in cycles, cycles turning through engraved bronze. The same object belongs to both realities. It is born from a world that seeks order, and it survives because disorder sends it to the bottom. The moon is the most familiar stranger in the sky. It rises large and pale over fields, harbours, temples, and rooftops, close enough to seem almost reachable. Yet it refuses simple behaviour. It changes shape. It changes brightness. It rises later each night. It moves against the stars. And even when its cycle seems regular, there is a hidden unevenness in its motion that careful observers eventually notice. Sometimes it appears to move faster along its path, sometimes slower. The moon does not simply circle through the heavens like a perfect wheel turning at a perfect speed. It has irregularity built into its apparent motion, and that irregularity is one of the places where the Antikythera mechanism becomes truly extraordinary. A simple lunar calendar only needs the moon's phases, A more ambitious device can coordinate lunar months with solar years. But the Antikythera mechanism appears to go further. It includes a mechanical system designed to approximate the moon's varying speed across the sky. This is not a casual feature. It is a sign that the maker, or the tradition behind the maker, is not satisfied with a rough moon. The machine aims to capture a subtler moon, the moon known to astronomers who compare theory against observation and notice that the sky does not always obey the simplest model. Greek astronomy inherits a powerful ideal celestial motion should be describable through circles. Circles are orderly, elegant, and mathematically tractable. Yet the observed heavens are not perfectly simple. The sun's apparent motion through the year is uneven. The planets wander, pause, and reverse against the stars. The moon is especially troublesome because it is close, bright, and visibly changing. Ancient astronomers developed geometric models to account for these variations. Using combinations of circles, offsets, and epicycles, the Antikythera mechanism translates one such kind of understanding into metal. The most celebrated lunar feature of the mechanism is often associated with a pin and slot arrangement connected to a pair of gears. In simplified terms, this system allows a rotation to be transmitted in a way that produces a variable output rather than a perfectly uniform one. One gear carries a pin that engages with the slot in another gear, and because of the arrangement of their centers, the motion speeds and slows in a controlled way. The result is not the true physical orbit of the moon as modern science understands it, but a mechanical approximation of its observed anomaly. For an ancient geared device, this is astonishing. The surprise is not merely that the maker knows the moon's motion is uneven. The surprise is that he builds unevenness into the machine. Most mechanical devices prefer regularity. Regular rotation is easier to make, easier to transmit, easier to predict. Here, irregularity is the point. The mechanism does not hide the moon's imperfection beneath a smooth display. It encodes that imperfection, because the goal is fidelity to the sky. The heavens are not being forced into crude simplicity. They are being modelled with enough subtlety to require ingenious mechanical compromise. What survives in the record suggests that this lunar theory may reflect ideas associated with Hipparchus, the great Greek astronomer active in the 2nd century BC. Hipparchus is known for important work on lunar and solar motion, star positions, and the mathematical refinement of astronomy. Whether he personally had anything to do with the mechanism is uncertain, and scholars still debate the exact intellectual lineage, but the connection is plausible in a broader sense. The mechanism emerges from a world in which astronomers like Hipparchus are trying to make celestial theory quantitatively precise. It is not hard to imagine a workshop drawing on such knowledge, even if the chain of transmission is now broken. This is where the machine becomes less like a calendar and more like a mechanical argument. It says, without words, that the moon's motion can be represented by a system of parts. It says that an abstract astronomical model can be embodied in bronze. The model may be imperfect by modern standards, but that is not the point. Every scientific model is an approximation shaped by available knowledge, tools, and aims. The Antikythera mechanism's lunar system is remarkable because it takes a mathematical approximation and gives it moving teeth, pins, axles, and pointers. There is also a human drama hidden inside that engineering. Someone had to decide how much complexity was worth including. Every additional feature makes the machine harder to design, harder to build, and easier to break. A simpler mechanism could have shown lunar phases and months well enough for many practical purposes. But this device appears to aim higher. It wants the moon not only as a phase maker, not only as a month maker, but as a wandering body whose pace itself matters. That ambition reveals a culture of precision, or at least a patron and maker willing to pay for precision. The lunar phase display, probably shown by a small rotating sphere or pointer arrangement on the front, would have given the user a familiar visual rhythm: new moon, crescent, quarter, full, and back again. This is the moon of ordinary life, the moon anyone can see. Behind it, the gearwork carries the less visible moon of mathematical astronomy. That layering is beautiful. The surface display speaks to experience. The hidden mechanism speaks to theory. The user sees a phase. But inside the box a more complex argument is unfolding. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient craftsmen achieved this integration with the surviving tools and materials. They did not have modern lathes, computer-aided design, or industrial gear cutting. They worked with hand tools, visual judgment, templates, and accumulated skill. The gears are not perfect. Their teeth vary. Their alignment would have required care. Friction, wear, and backlash would have mattered. Yet the machine was built well enough for the concept to function. That is the difference between a clever diagram and a technological achievement. A diagram can ignore resistance. Bronze cannot. The lunar system also reminds us that ancient astronomy is not merely mythology wearing mathematical clothing. Greek and Babylonian observers are not simply telling stories about gods moving lights through the sky. Religious and mythic meanings certainly surround celestial bodies, but alongside them exists a rigorous tradition of observation, prediction, and model-making. The Antikythera Mechanism is one of the strongest surviving proofs of that rigor. It is difficult to dismiss ancient scientific sophistication when it is cut into gears. At the same time, care is needed. The mechanism does not mean ancient people possessed modern astrophysics. They did not know gravity in the Newtonian sense, nor elliptical orbits in the Keplerian sense, nor the full physical nature of the moon's motion. Their models were geocentric and geometric, built to save appearances and predict positions. But within that framework, they achieved remarkable precision. The machine's genius lies not in being secretly modern, but in being brilliantly ancient. It belongs to its own intellectual world, and that world deserves to be understood on its own terms. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the exact front display and how all lunar indications appeared to the user. But the surviving gearwork strongly suggests a concern with lunar anomaly and phase. This means the mechanism is not simply counting months. It is mediating between observation and theory. It allows the moon's visible changes and its mathematical irregularities to become part of one coordinated instrument. There is a quiet wonder in imagining the user turning the handle slowly, watching the lunar indicator move. Perhaps the owner already knows the moon outside in the night sky. Perhaps he has seen it rise over water, red at the horizon, or disappear into cloud, or shine over a city during a festival. The machine does not replace that experience. It gives another way of possessing it. The moon becomes not only something seen, but something understood through recurrence, ratio, and mechanical sympathy. That phrase, mechanical sympathy, seems appropriate because the device is not cold in the way modern machinery is sometimes imagined. It is intimate. Its maker has studied the moon's stubbornness and answered with a small, clever irregularity hidden inside bronze. There is almost a tenderness in that the sky is not simplified beyond recognition. It is allowed to be difficult. The machine honors difficulty by making room for it, and this deepens the larger mystery. If one surviving mechanism contains such subtle lunar engineering, then the lost tradition around it may have been even richer than the artifact alone can prove. Perhaps other devices modelled planetary motions more fully. Perhaps teaching instruments circulated among astronomers and patrons. Perhaps the Antikythera mechanism was exceptional, but not unique. Scholars still debate how far that inference can be pushed. What survives is one damaged object, and responsible history cannot build an entire vanished industry from a single wreck. Yet the object itself is enough to show that the boundary of ancient mechanical possibility once lay much farther out than anyone expected. The moon's uneven path is therefore more than a technical feature. It is a clue to a mindset. The Maker does not build only what is easy. He builds toward what is true enough to matter. He takes a celestial body that resists uniformity and gives its resistance a place in the machine. In doing so, he leaves behind one of the most delicate traces of ancient scientific ambition, not the desire to dominate nature, but the desire to follow it closely, even when it moves unevenly through the dark. Among all the patterns in the sky, eclipses carry a special kind of power. A full moon darkens and turns the colour of old copper. The sun, source of heat and ordinary daylight, is bitten away until the world grows strange. Birds quiet, shadows sharpen, faces lift toward a sky that seems, for a few minutes, to have broken its own rules. Even in cultures with sophisticated astronomical knowledge, eclipses are not emotionally neutral events. They're dramatic, unsettling, and difficult to ignore. The Antikythera mechanism does not remove that drama, but it does something extraordinary with it. It places eclipse prediction inside a machine. On the back of the device, one of the spiral dials is linked to the Saros cycle, a period of 223 lunar months, a little over 18 years, after which similar eclipses tend to recur. This cycle was known in ancient astronomy, especially through Babylonian observational traditions, where long records of celestial events made such repetitions visible. The Antikythera mechanism turns that long memory into a physical path. A pointer moving along the spiral can indicate months in which an eclipse is possible, with inscriptions giving further information. What once required tables, records, or specialist calculation becomes part of the motion of bronze. This is not the same as predicting every detail with modern precision. Eclipses depend on geometry, visibility, and location. A solar eclipse may occur but not be visible from a particular city. The Saros cycle repeats conditions approximately, not perfectly. The mechanism's eclipse predictions are therefore best understood as identifying likely eclipse months and characteristics within the ancient framework of knowledge. The evidence remains incomplete, and some inscriptions are damaged. But the device clearly belongs to a tradition that treats eclipses as calculable events rather than random terrors. That shift matters. In many ancient societies, eclipses could be read as omens, signs of divine displeasure, warnings to rulers, or disturbances in the cosmic order. Astronomy and omen interpretation often coexist rather than exclude each other. A predicted eclipse can still be ominous. Knowing that something will happen does not necessarily make it meaningless. But prediction changes the human relationship to fear. The darkness no longer arrives entirely without warning. It becomes part of a cycle, strange but not lawless. The mechanism embodies that transformation dread given a schedule. A lesser-known feature of the eclipse dial is that inscriptions appear to include details such as whether the eclipse is solar or lunar, and even indications of time of day or night. Some readings suggest references to colour or magnitude, though scholars still debate certain interpretations because the text is fragmentary. This is the kind of detail that makes the mechanism feel less like a simplified educational toy and more like a serious astronomical instrument. It does not merely say that eclipses recur, it classifies them. The Saros dial also seems to have been paired with a smaller subsidiary dial connected to the exoligmos cycle, a period of 3 Saros cycles, or about 54 years. This longer cycle helps correct the time of day shift that occurs from one Saros to the next. After one Saros, an eclipse pattern returns, but the Earth has turned by roughly a third of a day relative to the event, affecting where it is visible. After 3 Saros cycles, the timing aligns more closely again. To include such a correction is a sign of real sophistication. The machine does not simply adopt a famous number, it manages the imperfection of that number across longer time. Here again, the mechanism reveals its deep character. It is not a device built from one neat cycle, but from cycles layered with corrections. The metonic cycle reconciles lunar months and solar years. The lunar anomaly system addresses uneven motion. The Saros cycle predicts eclipse seasons. The exoligmos refines eclipse timing. Each feature admits that the sky is patterned, but not simply. The ancient maker is not worshipping simplicity. He is organizing complexity. No single explanation fully accounts for the cultural meaning such a machine would have had to its owner. For an astronomer, it could demonstrate the mathematical regularity of celestial events. For a teacher, it could make invisible cycles visible to students. For an elite collector, it could be a marvel of Greek learning and craftsmanship. For someone interested in astrology, it could help identify charged moments in time. These roles may overlap. Antiquity does not require the clean separation between science, religion, prestige, and prediction that modern categories often impose. The eclipse system also shows how ancient knowledge depends on memory beyond the individual. No human being casually observes enough eclipses in one lifetime to discover these cycles alone. The Saros is a triumph of record keeping. It requires generations of observations, copied, preserved, compared, and interpreted. The Antikythera Mechanism is therefore not just a machine of prediction. It is a condensed inheritance. Every eclipse mark on its dial carries the weight of earlier watchers, many of them nameless, who saw the sky darken and recorded when it happened. There is something moving in that. The machine makes future darkness visible because past darkness was remembered. A lunar eclipse seen by someone centuries earlier, perhaps written on a clay tablet or papyrus record, becomes part of a cycle that guides a bronze pointer in another land. Knowledge travels through time before the ship ever travels across the sea. The mechanism is built from accumulated attention. Yet the device also reminds us how easy that attention is to lose. Records can burn, schools can close, languages can become unreadable, workshops can vanish. The Antikythera Mechanism survives because it syncs, but most of the intellectual chain behind it survives only in fragments scattered through texts, later summaries, and mathematical traditions. Scholars still debate the exact sources used by its maker, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the eclipse dial proves that the machine's designer had access to advanced cyclic astronomy and knew how to render it mechanically. To imagine the dial in use is to imagine a different experience of time. The user turns the handle, perhaps advancing month by month. Most months pass ordinarily. Then a mark appears. An eclipse is possible. The inscription may indicate whether the sun or moon is involved. The machine does not make the sky dark. It announces that darkness belongs to order. The effect must have been impressive, not because ancient people were naive, but because the union of prediction and craftsmanship has always had power. Modern people live surrounded by prediction weather forecasts, tide tables, satellite tracking, calendars filled years ahead. That familiarity can dull the strangeness of what the Antikythera mechanism does. In its own world, a compact instrument that could coordinate eclipse cycles would have been intellectually dazzling. It would turn rare celestial events into something a hand could approach. A terrifying sky becomes a readable sky. At the same time, the mechanism would not make every observer calm. Eclipses often remain socially charged even when predicted. A ruler may still fear what people will say. A priest may still interpret meaning. An army may still be shaken by darkness at the wrong hour. Prediction and anxiety can live together. The mechanism does not prove that ancient rationality defeated ancient fear. It proves something subtler. Ancient people could build rational systems in a world still alive with omen, ritual and awe. This balance is important because the Antikythera mechanism is sometimes pulled into modern myths about lost enlightenment, as though it represents a hidden ancient science that should have led directly to modern technology. But the machine belongs to a world with different goals. It is not trying to industrialize production or automate labor. It is trying to make celestial order intelligible. Its eclipse dial is not a step toward factories. It is a step toward grasping time. And perhaps that is why the eclipse feature feels so profound. Eclipses are moments when cosmic order appears to fail, yet the mechanism shows that even the failure has rhythm. The sun can vanish, the moon can redden, the world can pause, and still the event belongs to a cycle written in months and teeth. The machine does not remove mystery. It relocates mystery from randomness to pattern. The unknown is no longer whether the heavens have order, but how deeply that order runs, and how much of it human hands can capture before their own works vanish. Near Antikythera, the ship carrying this calculated darkness goes down into actual darkness. Its cargo falls through water. Statues settle among rocks. The mechanism breaks. The eclipse dial, made to predict shadow, enters a shadow lasting almost 2,000 years. When it returns, it carries an irony so perfect it almost feels designed a machine that once told people when the light would disappear is itself recovered from the long eclipse of history. The Antikythera mechanism is often approached through the grandeur of the heavens, but one of its most human features is that it does not stop at the heavens. It brings celestial time down into the rhythms of ordinary and ceremonial life, the same machine that follows the sun, moon, and eclipses also appears to mark calendars connected with festivals and athletic games. This detail can seem modest beside eclipse prediction or lunar anomaly, but it may be one of the clearest signs of what the mechanism meant to the people who used it. It was not only a model of the cosmos, it was a model of lived time. Ancient Greek time is not one thing. It is civic, religious, agricultural, political, and astronomical all at once. A city's year is filled with sacrifices, assemblies, magistracies, markets, debts, initiations, and public competitions. Time is not merely counted. It is organized into obligation and memory. Festivals bind communities to gods and ancestors. Athletic games bind distant cities into shared prestige and rivalry. Calendars tell people not only where they are in the year, but who they are together. A mechanism that tracks such time is therefore not a cold scientific tool. It touches identity. One of the subsidiary displays on the Antikythera mechanism is often interpreted as a games dial, indicating the cycle of major Pan-Hellenic competitions, including famous events such as the Olympic Games. The exact reading of all labels has been debated because damage and corrosion leave gaps. but the general presence of a games-related cycle is one of the most evocative discoveries. The device that predicts eclipses also remembers when people gather to run, wrestle, race horses, honor gods, and display the disciplined body before a watching world. This combination is not as strange as it first seems. The Great Games are calendrical events, tied to cycles that extend beyond one city. They require coordination. Athletes, trainers, patrons, spectators, merchants, poets, and envoys need to know when to travel. The Mediterranean is full of local calendars, and aligning them with shared festivals is not trivial. A machine capable of managing cycles could naturally include such information. What survives in the record suggests that the mechanism links cosmic order with cultural order, the turning moon with the timing of human gathering. There is a lesser-known tension here. The Olympic Games are so famous today that they can flatten the ancient athletic world into one event, but the Pan-Hellenic circuit was broader. Games at sanctuaries such as Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia also mattered deeply. They were not entertainment in the modern sense alone. They were religious occasions, diplomatic stages, aristocratic showcases, and engines of fame. Victory could transform a family's status. Cities celebrated champions. Poets immortalized them. Sculptors shaped their bodies in bronze and stone. The same culture that valued the measured heavens valued the measured performance of human excellence. The Antikythera Mechanism sits at the meeting point of those measures. It counts months and cycles. Athletes count training days and festival years. It marks celestial recurrence. Cities mark sacred recurrence. It predicts rare shadow. Communities anticipate repeated celebration. The machine's logic is mathematical, but its calendar world is social. This is why it should not be imagined only in a scholar's private room. Its displays belong to a broader culture where astronomy, religion, and civic life interlock. Scholars still debate exactly how the mechanism was used in practice. It may not have been a public scheduling tool in the way a civic calendar inscription might be. It may have belonged to an educated individual who appreciated the elegance of seeing multiple time systems coordinated. It may have been used for teaching, demonstration, or elite display. Yet the inclusion of festival and game cycles suggests that the maker did not view astronomy as detached from human affairs. The sky mattered because people lived under it according to calendars. This is especially important in a world where travel depends so heavily on season. A festival is not just a date in the abstract, it is a journey. Roads must be taken, ships must sail, weather must be considered, political safety, truces, invitations, and obligations all shape movement. A Pan-Hellenic festival gathers people across distance, and distance is never easy in antiquity. To mark these cycles mechanically is to place the travelling human body inside the larger architecture of time. The game's dial also helps soften the misleading image of the mechanism as a purely mysterious object, isolated from life. Mystery surrounds its survival and sophistication, but its functions are not alien. They belong to real needs and fascinations when the moon changes, when months begin, when eclipses may come, when festivals return, when games are held. It is a machine for a culture that watches the sky and organizes society through recurring moments of shared meaning. No single explanation fully accounts for the selection of all cycles included in the mechanism. Why these games? Why this calendar tradition? Why this arrangement? The answers may lie in the identity of the patron, the region of manufacture, the intended owner, or the educational setting for which it was made. If the month names point toward a particular regional tradition, That may tell us something about its origin or audience. But the evidence remains incomplete. The machine gives enough to suggest context, not enough to identify a nameplate on the workshop door. Still, the human world around the dials can be imagined with some confidence. A year advances, a city prepares for a festival. Priests consult calendars, families make offerings, traders see opportunity in crowds, athletes train under local teachers, hoping to travel and return with glory. Sailors judge whether the season is favourable. Somewhere, in a more rarefied setting, a person turns the mechanism and sees these cycles placed beside the paths of sun and moon. It is a vision of society synchronized with the sky. There is a quiet irony in the fact that the mechanism itself may have been travelling as cargo when it was lost. A device that helps organize time across distance is caught in the hazards of distance. It may have known, in its dials, when games would return, but it could not save its ship from weather or rock. Its calendars continued to mean something only as long as human hands could turn them. Once the sea entered the vessel, festival cycles, eclipse cycles, and lunar cycles were all reduced to broken bronze in the dark. Yet when modern researchers decode the game's dial, it reopens a path into ancient feeling. The mechanism is not just about prediction, it is about anticipation. A calendar is a technology of expectation. It allows people to live towards something: a harvest, a ceremony, a voyage, a contest, an eclipse, a new year. The Antikythera Mechanism gathers many forms of anticipation into one object. It compresses the future into readable tracks. This changes the tone of the machine. It is tempting to admire it only for its complexity, as though the number of gears alone were the point. But complexity serves meaning. The maker is not building difficulty for its own sake. He is creating a device that lets different futures be compared. Some futures are celestial, like eclipses. Some are civic, like months and festivals. Some are athletic and sacred, like the games. Together, they form a world in which time is layered rather than linear. What survives in the mechanism suggests that ancient people could think of time not as a single road, but as overlapping circles. The moon circles through phases. The sun circles through the year. Eclipse cycles return after long intervals. Games recur in multi-year rhythms. Civic calendars turn with local names and rituals. Human life is brief, but these cycles exceed the individual. To understand them is to stand, for a moment, beyond one's own lifespan. That may be part of the mechanism's prestige. An owner who can operate it is not simply checking dates. He is handling a miniature order of the world. He sees how short human events, like a festival, belong to larger structures, like the calendar, which belong to larger celestial rhythms. The machine gives scale. It lets the user feel both mastery and smallness. The Antikythera Mechanism therefore brings us closer to ancient life precisely because it reaches beyond daily life. It shows people trying to align themselves with patterns larger than themselves. Their cities will fall, their ships will sink, their statues will break, and even their machines will corrode. But the games return, the moon returns, the sun returns, eclipses return, and the need to find meaning in recurrence returns as well. In the next turning of the story, the question becomes more pointed. If the mechanism is so deeply rooted in Greek astronomical and civic culture, where exactly did it come from? Which island, city, school, or workshop could have produced such a thing? The gears lead outward again, away from the wreck and toward places where astronomy, craftsmanship, and ambition once met. Among those places, one island has always drawn particular attention, a place of sailors, philosophers, and sky watchers, where the roads of learning and commerce crossed under bright Aegean light. Rhodes enters the Antikythera story like a bright island of possibility. It is not proven beyond doubt that the mechanism was made there, and the evidence remains incomplete. But Rhodes has long attracted attention for good reasons. In the late Hellenistic world, it is a maritime power, a centre of learning, a place where navigation, philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy can meet the practical skills of craftsmen and sailors. It sits in the eastern Mediterranean not as an isolated rock, but as a crossroads. Ships arrive with goods, news, instruments, books, and people. Ideas do not simply belong to libraries, they move through harbours. The island's intellectual reputation is tied to some of the most important names in ancient astronomy. Hipparchus, often associated with Rhodes, works in the 2nd century BC and becomes one of antiquity's great observers and mathematical astronomers. He refines models of solar and lunar motion, develops star catalogue work, and helps advance the quantitative study of the heavens. Later, Posidonius, a philosopher with wide interests, also teaches on Rhodes and attracts Roman elites. These names do not prove that either man touched the Antikythera mechanism, but they make the island feel plausible as part of the world that could produce it. Scholars still debate the exact origin, yet the intellectual climate matters. Hipparchus is especially important because the mechanism's lunar sophistication seems compatible with the kind of astronomy associated with him. The moon's uneven motion, the effort to model anomaly, the concern with cycles and prediction all belong to a tradition of careful observation and mathematical explanation. It would be too simple to say that Hipparchus built the machine. There is no evidence for that. But it is reasonable to say that the mechanism comes from a world in which Hipparchus-like astronomy could be translated into mechanical form. The machine may preserve, in bronze, ideas that also lived in texts now lost. The possible Rhodian connection is strengthened by the ship's broader context. Rhodes is a major hub on routes connecting the eastern Mediterranean to the west. A luxury cargo could pass through or originate near such a place. Roman aristocrats are known to admire Greek learning, and educated Romans travelling in the East encounter teachers, philosophers, and scientific traditions. A device like the Antikythera mechanism could have been purchased, commissioned, gifted, or transported as part of this wider movement of elite culture. No single explanation fully accounts for its journey, but Rhodes offers a setting where sea routes and sky knowledge overlap naturally. Yet the mechanism may also point beyond Rhodes. Some calendar evidence has been linked to month names associated with Corinthian colonies or regions of northwestern Greece. That has led scholars to consider other possible origins or audiences. The machine may have been made in one place for use in another, or designed with a particular patron's calendar in mind. Ancient objects travel. Intellectual traditions travel. A calendar on a dial does not necessarily identify the workshop that cut the gears. It may identify the user, the market, or the cultural network. This uncertainty keeps the origin question alive. What is clear is that the mechanism belongs to the Hellenistic age, a period sometimes overshadowed in popular imagination by classical Athens before it and imperial Rome after it. Yet the Hellenistic world is one of the most inventive phases of ancient history. It is the world of Alexandria's scholars, of Eratosthenes estimating Earth's circumference, of Archimedes exploring mechanics and mathematics, of engineers designing pumps, automata, and war machines, of astronomers comparing models with observations. It is a world shaped by monarchies, courts, libraries, sanctuaries, and cities competing for prestige. Knowledge has patrons, and patrons like marvels. A surprising detail is that Hellenistic science often thrives in environments of both abstraction and spectacle. A king may support mathematical research because it enhances prestige. A temple may use mechanical wonders to intensify religious awe. A city may value astronomy for calendars and identity. A wealthy individual may collect instruments as signs of refinement. The Antikythera Mechanism fits this mixed world. It is rigorous enough to be scientific, beautiful enough to be prestigious, and practical enough to be useful. It does not have to belong to only one category. The making of such a device would require a rare convergence. An astronomer or mathematically trained designer has to determine the cycles and ratios. A mechanical craftsman has to realize them in bronze. Someone must engrave small technical inscriptions accurately. A casemaker must build the housing. A patron must fund the effort. This is not the work of a lone dreamer casually assembling scraps. It implies a workshop culture where precision, theory, and money come together. What survives in the record suggests not a miracle, but a skilled ecosystem. The word ecosystem is important because it resists the temptation to imagine genius floating free of circumstance. Ancient genius exists, but it needs tools, teachers, materials, audiences, and continuity. Hipparchus can refine lunar theory because there are observations to work from and mathematical traditions to use. A craftsman can build gears because there is knowledge of metalworking and demand for complex devices. A patron can value the machine because astronomy carries cultural prestige. The Antikythera Mechanism is a product of individuals, but also of a world arranged in such a way that their work can meet. And that world is changing. Roman influence presses into the Greek East. The old Hellenistic kingdoms weaken or fall. Greek cities negotiate autonomy, alliance, tribute, and survival. Knowledge continues, but its institutions are vulnerable. A workshop that thrives under one patron may disappear under another. A library's collection may be scattered. A device may be carried away as loot or luxury. The mechanism's possible journey toward Italy, if that is where the ship was heading, belongs to this shifting balance of power. Greek knowledge is admired even as Greek political independence declines. This tension gives the machine a melancholy edge. It may represent Hellenistic science at a high point, but it travels through a world in which the conditions that produced it are unstable. The same Roman appetite that preserves Greek culture by collecting it can also uproot it. Statues leave sanctuaries and cities. Books leave libraries. Teachers follow patrons. Instruments cross the sea. The mechanism may be one such traveller, detached from its original setting and placed into a new network of ownership. Scholars still debate whether the mechanism was a unique masterpiece, a custom commission, or one example of a class of instruments now lost. Its sophistication makes uniqueness tempting, but uniqueness in the archaeological record does not always mean uniqueness in ancient life. Bronze machines rarely survive. If similar devices existed, most would have been melted, broken, or destroyed. The Antikythera Mechanism may be the only survivor not because it was the only one, but because it was unlucky enough to sink and lucky enough to be found. The possible link to Rhodes, then, should be understood as a doorway rather than a verdict. It opens onto a world of astronomers watching the moon from island observatories, teachers explaining cycles to wealthy students, craftsmen cutting teeth into bronze, and ships waiting in harbour to carry the finished marvel away. Whether the workshop stood on Rhodes, in another Greek centre, or in a place connected to several traditions, the machine is unmistakably Hellenistic in spirit. It believes that the universe can be ordered through number. That number can be embodied in geometry, and that geometry can be made to move. There is a powerful human image in that chain. An observer watches the moon over many nights. A mathematician translates its behavior into a model. A designer converts the model into ratios. A craftsman cuts the ratios into gears. A user turns the gears and sees the moon return. Across each step, the sky becomes more intimate. The cosmos is not conquered, but it is approached. That is the achievement behind the origin mystery. The question is not only where the Antikythera mechanism was made, it is what kind of world made it possible. Roads may be part of the answer. Hipparchus may be part of the answer. Lost workshops and unnamed artisans are certainly part of the answer. But the complete answer lies in a vanished culture of connection, where sea roads carry both luxury and learning, and where the heavens are studied with enough seriousness that someone dares to build them in bronze. If the Antikythera mechanism were the only complex machine the ancient Greeks ever made, it would still be astonishing. But in some ways, that would be the simpler story. A single genius, a single patron, a single impossible workshop, a single object lost at sea. This version has the clean shape of legend. The harder and more interesting possibility is that the mechanism is not an isolated miracle at all. It may be the one survivor of a broader mechanical tradition, a tradition mostly erased because it was made from materials that history does not preserve kindly. Bronze is valuable. That fact alone has destroyed more ancient technology than any barbarian invasion in the popular imagination. A broken bronze gear is not just a broken gear, it is future metal. It can become a coin, a bowl, a weapon fitting, a statue repair, a mirror, a tool, or part of another machine. Wood rots, leather decays, papyrus burns, iron corrodes. Small portable devices vanish easily unless disaster protects them. Stone temples dominate ruins because stone endures, not because ancient life was made mostly of stone. The Antikythera mechanism survives because the sea both destroyed it and hid it from reuse. What survives in texts suggests that ancient mechanical knowledge was wider than the archaeological record alone can show. Greek engineers and writers describe water clocks, automata, pumps, geared devices, odometers, theatrical machines, temple mechanisms, and elaborate instruments meant to display ingenuity. Some descriptions are difficult to evaluate, and scholars still debate how literal, common, or practical every example was. Yet the tradition itself is real. The ancient Mediterranean was not mechanically barren. It had craftsmen who understood motion, pressure, gearing, balances, siphons, screws, and the pleasure of controlled surprise. The Antikythera mechanism sits at the most refined end of that tradition. It is not a pump or a clock in the ordinary sense. It is a machine of mathematical representation, but it does not have to appear from nothing. It may stand at the crossing point of several older streams' astronomical observation, geometric modelling, calendar calculation, metalworking, and the construction of demonstrational devices. In that sense, it is like finding one page from a lost technical library. The page is brilliant, but its greatest implication is the library. There are hints of such a library in ancient authors. Writers mention celestial globes and mechanical models associated with great figures such as Archimedes, though the exact nature of these devices remains debated. Later, Roman accounts describe instruments that represented the motions of heavenly bodies, and while these reports cannot simply be equated with the Antikythera mechanism, they show that ancient people knew the idea of a moving cosmos in miniature. The evidence remains incomplete. But the concept of mechanical astronomy was not unimaginable to antiquity. What is rare is surviving hardware. This rarity can distort judgment. If archaeologists found only one ancient surgical instrument, no one would assume surgery existed only once. If only one musical instrument survived, no one would assume music was almost unknown. But with complex machines, the scarcity feels more shocking because modern minds expect to technology trail prototypes, copies, improvements, industries. Ancient technical traditions did not always leave such trails. They could be local, custom-made, elite, and dependent on narrow circles of knowledge. A machine might be famous in one city and absent everywhere else. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of similar devices. If they existed, some may have been melted down, some may have broken and been discarded, some may have been kept in wooden cabinets that decayed, some may have been destroyed in fires, wars, or ordinary neglect, some may never have been numerous. The mechanism may represent a rare luxury object, not a mass-produced tool. Its survival does not prove an ancient factory of computers, but its sophistication strongly suggests prior experimentation. People rarely leap directly to such elegance without earlier attempts. The lost tradition also includes lost people. The names of philosophers and astronomers sometimes survive because texts preserve them. The names of craftsmen usually do not. Yet the mechanism depends on craftsmanship at every level. The gear teeth must be cut. The plates must be fitted. The axles must align. The inscriptions must be engraved in tiny letters. The case must protect the delicate interior while allowing displays to be read. This is not only the history of ideas, it is the history of hands. There is a quiet injustice in how often those hands vanish. Ancient intellectual history can become a parade of named men with theories, while the artisans who made theory tangible remain anonymous. The Antikythera Mechanism resists that imbalance because its brilliance is inseparable from making. A mathematical model of lunar motion is impressive. A working bronze system that approximates it is another kind of intelligence. It is practical, spatial, tactile, and unforgiving. The machine preserves that intelligence even without preserving the maker's name. The idea of a lost mechanical tradition should not be stretched into fantasy. The mechanism does not prove that ancient Greeks had steam engines in common use, electrical devices, or hidden modern technologies. Popular speculation sometimes runs far beyond the evidence, turning a remarkable artifact into a doorway for unsupported claims. That does the object no favours. Its real achievement is stronger than fiction because it is grounded, a Hellenistic workshop, using known materials and ancient astronomical theory, built a geared calculator of startling sophistication. That is enough to transform history without inventing anything beyond the evidence. The real mystery is not whether aliens or impossible sciences were involved. They were not needed. The real mystery is why such skill left so little behind. That question leads into the fragile sociology of technology. A technique survives when there are institutions to teach it, markets to reward it, materials to support it, and communities that find it useful. If a machine is too expensive, too specialized, too dependent on a narrow elite, or too difficult to repair, it may not spread widely. If the intellectual world around it changes, it may become a curiosity rather than a seed. The Antikythera Mechanism may have belonged to a technical lineage that failed to become durable, not because ancient people lacked intelligence, but because intelligence alone does not guarantee continuity. A device can be brilliant and still fragile. A workshop can be advanced and still vanish. A patron can support innovation and still die without a successor. A city can shelter knowledge and still fall into political turmoil. The survival of technology is never automatic. There is also the question of purpose. The mechanism computes, but it does not obviously increase production, transport heavy goods, or generate wealth in the direct way that later industrial machines do. Its value is intellectual, educational, calendrical, astrological, and prestigious. Those values are real, but they may not create broad economic pressure for replication. A beautiful astronomical computer can impress a small circle. A better plough changes many fields. Technologies spread for reasons that are often practical before they are elegant. Still, the machine's existence changes what can be imagined about ancient workshops. It suggests that there were people capable of thinking mechanically about abstraction, not only about force. They could use gears to model relationships rather than merely transmit power. That is a profound conceptual step. It means computation, in a broad sense, did not begin with electronics, nor even with early modern clockwork. It has roots in the ancient desire to make order visible. When modern replicas of the mechanism are built, they reveal another hidden truth the original designer must have understood the whole as a system. A small change in one gear affects another display. The case limits the available space. The dials must be readable. The user's input must drive multiple outputs without constant failure. This is systems engineering before the phrase exists. The machine is not just a collection of clever parts. It is an organized whole. What makes the lost tradition so haunting is that the mechanism lets us see only its highest ridge. Behind it there may have been drawings, teaching models, simpler calendars, experimental lunar devices, failed gear trains, workshop tools, and technical conversations that left no trace. Perhaps there were only a few. Perhaps there were many more than we dare imagine. Scholars still debate how far the inference should go, and caution is necessary. But the machine's complexity makes total isolation difficult to believe. The Antikythera mechanism survives like a single gear from a vanished clock of knowledge. It turns our attention not only to what ancient people achieved, but to what history filters out. The past was once full of perishable things, sounds, gestures, demonstrations, repairs, lessons, mistakes, and machines that moved. Most of them are gone. The mechanism remains because catastrophe sealed it away. Its survival is not evidence that time preserves the best things. It is evidence that time preserves accidents. And so the lost mechanical tradition becomes one of the deepest mysteries around the artifact. Not a mystery of supernatural origin, but a mystery of absence. The question is no longer only how the machine worked, it is how many other machines once worked, how many hands turned them, how many students watched their pointers move, and how completely a civilization's technical imagination can disappear when the objects that carried it are melted, burned, broken, or drowned. By the time the Antikythera ship goes down, the Greek world has already entered the long shadow of Rome. This does not mean Greek culture has ended. In many ways, Greek art, philosophy, science, and education become more desirable than ever among Roman elites. But power has shifted. Armies, treaties, taxes, collectors, governors, merchants, and aristocrats now draw the riches of the eastern Mediterranean toward Italy. Statues move, books move, teachers move, sacred treasures move. Sometimes they move through trade, sometimes through patronage, sometimes through conquest, which is trade with the politeness removed. The shipwreck's cargo fits this world of transfer. It carries luxury goods of the sort Roman wealth increasingly consumes: fine sculpture, bronzes, glass, furniture elements, pottery, and objects associated with refined Greek taste. The mechanism rests among them as a different kind of treasure, less visually grand than a statue, but perhaps more intellectually prestigious. A Roman owner might value it as a marvel of Greek learning. A Greek owner might be transporting it west. A merchant might be carrying it for sale. The evidence remains incomplete, and the ship's exact voyage cannot be reconstructed with certainty. But the wreck belongs to a Mediterranean in which cultural inheritance is being physically relocated. This movement has a double character. Rome helps preserve Greek culture by admiring it, copying it, collecting it, and making it central to elite education. Yet the same process can tear objects from their original settings. A statue made for a sanctuary becomes villa decoration. A book copied in a scholarly centre becomes part of a private library. A machine designed in a Hellenistic workshop becomes cargo. Knowledge survives, but not always with its context intact. The Antikythera Mechanism may be one small victim of that dislocation. Its dials still carry cycles of ski and festival, but the community that first understood them is gone from the object. The owner is nameless. The maker is nameless. The intended destination is uncertain. The ship becomes a moving fragment of a changing world, and when it sinks, that fragment freezes. The wreck is not just a disaster at sea, it is a snapshot of civilization in transfer. No single explanation fully accounts for why the mechanism was aboard that ship, but the broader pattern is clear enough. Rome's rise creates an enormous appetite for Greek brilliance. The machine, whether purchased, gifted, commissioned, or looted, belongs to that appetite. It is easy to imagine it displayed in an Italian villa, turned for guests by lamplight, its owner explaining the cycles of eclipses and games with the calm pleasure of possessing both wealth and knowledge. But that future never happens. The sea interrupts the transfer. The object meant to move culture across water becomes evidence only because the journey fails. There is a quiet violence in this history. Even when no battle is visible on the wreck, empires do not only conquer land, they redirect memory. They decide which objects travel, which remain, which are copied, which are stripped, which are melted, which are admired, and which are forgotten. The Antikythera ship may have been a merchant vessel, but it sails through the consequences of war and domination. Its cargo tells of taste, but also of imbalance. Greek culture is treasured at the very moment Greek political freedom is narrowing. And yet, the story is not simply one of Roman theft or Greek loss. The Mediterranean is more tangled than that. Greek craftsmen work for Roman patrons. Roman students learn from Greek teachers. Greek cities use Roman connections. Merchants profit from demand. Objects are bought as well as seized. The mechanism's journey may have involved ordinary commerce as much as imperial extraction. Scholars still debate the details, and the evidence remains incomplete. What can be said is that the ship belongs to a world where admiration and domination travel together. The mechanism itself seems almost unaware of this turmoil. Its gears know nothing of empire. They encode cycles older and wider than Rome lunar months, solar years, eclipses, games. Yet its survival is shaped entirely by human power. Without Roman demand for Greek luxury, perhaps it never leaves its place of use. Without maritime trade, perhaps it never reaches the channel near Antikythera. Without shipwreck, perhaps it is eventually repaired, inherited, discarded, or melted. The fate of a machine built to express celestial order depends on politics, money, and weather. That contrast gives the artifact much of its tragic force. The heavens return with reliable rhythm, human worlds do not. The Hellenistic kingdoms that nurtured scientific traditions weaken. Patronage shifts. Libraries suffer neglect or violence. Workshops lose customers. Skilled crafts can continue in pockets, but the broader ecosystem changes. Knowledge may remain admired, but admiration alone does not preserve the conditions that created it. A Roman collector can own a Greek instrument without sustaining the workshop tradition that made it possible. This is one reason the Antikythera Mechanism feels like a late light from a fading constellation. It does not mean Hellenistic science ends abruptly with the wreck. Ancient astronomy continues. Mechanical knowledge continues in various forms, but the specific culture that produced such a compact-geared astronomical computer becomes difficult to trace afterward. The line does not vanish all at once, it frays. Texts survive better than machines. Theories survive better than tools. Names survive better than workshops. A lesser-known irony is that Roman fascination with Greek learning could be intensely selective. Elite Romans prized philosophy, rhetoric, art, and certain forms of technical knowledge, but they did not necessarily create broad systems for preserving every specialized craft. An object might be admired as a curiosity rather than reproduced as a technology. The mechanism could have been a marvel to own, not a device to manufacture widely. That difference matters. A civilization can admire ingenuity without turning it into a durable industry. The wreck also reminds us that the movement of knowledge depends on fragile bodies and vessels. A machine can be brilliant, but it still needs a hull. A cargo can be priceless, but it still depends on sailors reading wind and coast. A collector's desire in Italy depends on men loading crates in the East, on ropes, anchors, contracts, food, water, luck. The ancient economy is not abstract. It is made of backs, hands, timber, canvas, and risk. The Antikythera Mechanism reaches us because all of that fails at one particular place. When the ship breaks apart, the cargo loses its human categories. A statue no longer belongs to a patron. A machine no longer belongs to astronomy. Amphorae no longer belong to trade. Everything becomes seabed material, marble, bronze, wood, glass, and bone enter the same slow transformation. The sea does not care which object was sacred, which was expensive, which was brilliant. It covers them all. But history, when it returns, does care. Modern scholars look at the wreck and see the outlines of a world being rearranged. The Antikythera Mechanism becomes a witness not only to scientific achievement, but to cultural movement under Roman expansion. It shows that advanced Greek knowledge did not exist outside politics. It travelled through the same systems that moved luxury and loot. It was vulnerable to the same storms. What survives in the record suggests that the ship went down sometime in the 1st century BC, a period of intense upheaval across the eastern Mediterranean. Roman wars, Mithridatic conflicts, piracy, shifting alliances, and economic exploitation all form part of the background. The mechanism does not need to be tied to one specific event to belong to that unsettled age. It is enough that it moves through a sea where wealth, violence, scholarship, and ambition constantly intersect. So the machine story widens again. It began as a mystery of gears, then became a mystery of astronomy, then of workshops, and now of empire. The question is not only how ancient people built such a device, but why the world that built it did not carry the tradition forward more visibly. The wreck near Antikythera offers one answer in miniature knowledge can be brilliant and still depend on unstable networks. When those networks shift, objects scatter. When ships sink, chains break. Somewhere before the disaster, the mechanism may have been packed carefully in its wooden case. Perhaps it was already old. Perhaps it had been used and admired. Perhaps it was newly made, destined for a powerful owner. The person who placed it aboard could not know that its greatest audience would not be Roman guests or Greek students, but researchers 2,000 years later. The machine was travelling through the age of conquest. It became immortal only because it never arrived. The Antikythera mechanism creates a tempting illusion. Once its sophistication is understood, the mind wants to draw a straight line from it to later clocks, calculators, scientific instruments, and eventually modern computers. The gears seem to point forward. The logic seems familiar. A hand turns an input, a hidden system processes ratios and displays return information. It feels like the beginning of a road. But history does not always behave like a road. Sometimes it behaves like a coastline glimpsed through fog, bright openings, sudden cliffs, long interruptions, and paths that vanish into water. The question is unavoidable. If the ancient Mediterranean could produce a machine like this around the 2nd or 1st century BC, why did it not produce an industrial revolution? Why did geared astronomical computers not become common tools of scholarship? Why is there no long-surviving series of increasingly advanced machines from Hellenistic workshops to Roman factories to medieval observatories? The answer is not that ancient people lacked intelligence. The mechanism itself makes that explanation impossible. The answer lies instead in the difference between invention and continuity. A technology survives when many conditions support it at once. There must be people who know how to make it, people who want it, materials to build it, institutions to teach it, money to fund it, and reasons to repair or improve it over generations. The Antikythera mechanism may have satisfied some of these conditions, but perhaps not enough of them widely enough. It was probably expensive, specialized, delicate, and dependent on a narrow world of astronomical theory and elite patronage. That is a fragile habitat for any technology. A plough can spread because many farmers need it. A water wheel can spread where labour, grain, and geography make it useful. A weapon can spread because states and armies reward advantage. But a compact astronomical computer served a smaller audience. It teaches, predicts, impresses, and organizes time, but it does not obviously feed a city, win a war, or multiply labor. Its value is profound, yet not necessarily broad. That may help explain why such devices, even if more than one existed, did not reshape daily production. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of this mechanical path. Economic structures matter. Slavery and cheap labor may have reduced incentives to mechanize certain forms of work, though this argument can be overstated if used too simply. Patronage matters. Elite support can create marvels, but marvels often remain dependent on elite taste. Political instability matters. Wars, conquests, piracy, and shifting power can disrupt workshops and schools. Material survival matters. Bronze devices vanish easily into furnaces. Textual survival matters too, because instructions and diagrams can disappear even when ideas once circulated. The mechanism also belongs to a culture where theoretical brilliance and practical production do not always join in the same way they do in later industrial societies. Ancient engineers are capable of astonishing devices, but there is not always a social system that turns cleverness into standardized manufacture. A machine might be admired as a wonder rather than developed as a platform. It might demonstrate learning rather than create a new industry. It might be commissioned once, copied a few times, and then forgotten when patrons change or makers die. This does not make the ancient world inferior, it makes it different. The modern habit is to measure technology by expansion, how fast it scales, how widely it spreads, how much it transforms production. The Antikythera Mechanism asks for another measure, how deeply a culture can understand a complex natural pattern and embody it in a singular object. By that measure, the machine is a triumph, even if it does not become the ancestor of a mechanical age. There is a lesser known but important point here. Ancient clockwork itself does not vanish completely. Water clocks continue. Gear use continues in some contexts. Mechanical ingenuity appears in later traditions, including Byzantine and Islamic automata, astronomical instruments, and medieval clockmaking. But the specific lineage from the Antikythera Mechanism is not visible as a continuous chain. The evidence remains incomplete. There may have been intermediate devices now lost, but archaeology has not given them to us. The result is a gap, and gaps invite both careful scholarship and reckless imagination. The reckless version says the mechanism proves a lost super-civilization, or a secret ancient technology suppressed by history. That is unnecessary and unsupported. The careful version is more interesting. It says that high-level technical knowledge can exist in pockets, even brilliant pockets, without transforming the entire world around it. It says invention is not enough. Culture has to choose, need, preserve, reproduce, and transmit. The Roman world, for all its engineering greatness, is not organized around experimental mechanical science in the modern sense. Rome builds roads, aqueducts, harbors, baths, mills, military machines, and monumental infrastructure. Its practical engineering is immense. But the Antikythera Mechanism belongs to a different technical family: precision mathematical instrumentation. Roman elites may admire such devices, but admiration does not guarantee a thriving instrument-making industry. A collector might own a marvel and never train the next generation of makers. The fragility of knowledge is one of the great themes hidden inside the artifact. A machine like this can be lost in several ways. The object can be destroyed, the manuals can be lost, the craftsman can die without apprentices, the astronomical assumptions can change, the market can disappear, the language of inscriptions can become obscure. Later generations can inherit fragments without context and fail to recognize them. Loss is rarely one event. It is usually a long thinning. The Antikythera Mechanism nearly suffers that fate completely. Even after it is recovered, it is almost misunderstood. Without modern imaging, its inner structure remains hidden. Without researchers willing to challenge assumptions, it remains an oddity. This is a sobering thought. The machine could have survived physically and still been lost intellectually. Preservation is not the same as understanding. Scholars still debate how exceptional the mechanism was in its own time. Some argue it must have emerged from a broader tradition because its design is too sophisticated to be a first attempt. Others emphasize how little direct evidence exists for comparable devices. Both cautions matter. The machine may be a peak with hidden foothills, or it may be a rare masterpiece from a narrow circle. Either way, its later disappearance shows that even extraordinary knowledge can fail to become durable. The reason the technology vanished may therefore be less a single cause than a convergence of weaknesses. It was too specialized to become common, too material to survive as text alone, too expensive to spread widely, too dependent on elite contexts, and too vulnerable to the collapse or transformation of Hellenistic institutions. Then, Over centuries, other traditions took different paths. Astronomy continued through observation, mathematics, tables, and instruments such as armillary spheres and astrolabes. Mechanical computation waited, not because minds were asleep, but because the social and technical conditions for its revival had to form again. That is what makes the mechanism so haunting. It is not a failed beginning of the modern world, it is a successful achievement of an ancient one. Its tragedy is not that it did not become something else. Its tragedy is that the world capable of making it left so little behind that later ages had to rediscover the possibility of such machines almost from darkness. The bronze gears therefore carry a warning about civilizations. Knowledge does not automatically accumulate. It can pool, shine, and drain away. It can move from observatory to workshop to ship to seabed. It can survive as a fragment and wait centuries for someone to ask the right question. The Antikythera Mechanism was built to show recurring cycles, but its own history reveals a harsher truth. Human knowledge is not always cyclical, and it is not always progressive. Sometimes it is brilliant. Local, fragile, and gone. Modern eyes do not discover the Antikythera Mechanism all at once. They learn to see it. That distinction matters because the object is never truly hidden after 1901. It sits in a museum collection, catalogued, preserved, known in a limited way, and yet not fully understood. Its greatest secrets are not buried under the sand anymore. They are buried inside expectation. For a long time, the mechanism is a strange ancient object with gears. Only gradually does it become a machine that can rewrite the history of technology. This slow awakening begins with the courage to take the fragments seriously. A corroded lump is easy to underestimate, especially when surrounded by spectacular sculpture. The bronze youth from the same wreck has a body, a face, an immediate presence. The mechanism has damage, missing parts, and technical obscurity. It asks for a different kind of imagination, one that can look at broken gear teeth and see not ruin, but intention. It also asks for restraint, because the temptation to fill every gap too confidently is always present. The first investigators notice the gears, then later scholars begin to ask what the gears might have done. As radiography improves, the machine's hidden layers emerge. The 20th century brings new ways of looking through matter, and the 21st century sharpens them further. X-ray computed tomography, advanced surface imaging, digital modelling, and high-resolution photography reveal inscriptions too faint for ordinary sight, tooth counts too obscured for direct measurement, and structural relationships buried inside corrosion. The mechanism becomes, in effect, an archaeological patient examined by instruments of modern medicine and engineering. What is striking is how collaborative the decoding becomes. No single scholar can own the whole problem. Conservators understand the fragile body of the artifact. Epigraphers read tiny Greek letters. Historians place terminology in context. Astronomers identify cycles. Mechanical engineers test whether proposed gear trains could actually work. Computer modelling helps visualize arrangements that can no longer be moved in the original. The machine was built by a convergence of ancient skills, and it is decoded by a convergence of modern ones. A lesser-known difficulty is that imaging does not simply hand over answers. Scans produce data, but data must be interpreted. A shadow may be a gear tooth, a crack, corrosion, or overlap. A faint letter may be read in more than one way. A missing gear may be required by a reconstruction, but that does not make its exact form certain. Scholars still debate details because the artifact deserves debate. the evidence remains incomplete, and the best modern research does not erase uncertainty. It maps it. As the reconstructions improve, the mechanism becomes more impressive rather than less. Sometimes mysteries shrink when explained. This one grows. The explanation is not that the device is magical, but that it is intelligently made in ways more subtle than early observers imagined. The metonic spiral, the Saros dial, the lunar anomaly system, the inscriptions, the compact layering of gear trains, each solved problem reveals another layer of design. The machine's wonder survives contact with evidence. Modern replicas play an important role in this process. To build a working model is to test an interpretation against physical reality. If gears collide, if a pointer cannot travel properly, if the ratios fail, the theory must change. Replicas also restore something that the original can no longer safely provide motion. The surviving fragments cannot be turned. They are too fragile, too damaged, too precious. But a reconstruction can move, and movement is the mechanism's native language. Only when the gears turn does the full idea become visible. There is an emotional charge in watching a replica operate. A handle turns, and the moon changes phase. A pointer advances through a spiral. Eclipse months approach. The ancient machine, long frozen in corrosion, becomes intelligible as an action rather than a relic. It is a reminder that many artifacts in museums are amputated from their original behavior. A cup is meant to be held. A lyre is meant to sound. A mechanism is meant to move. Stillness protects it, but motion explains it. No single explanation fully accounts for why the Antikythera mechanism captured modern imagination so powerfully once its functions became clearer. Part of the fascination comes from the phrase ancient computer, which compresses the shock into two words. Part comes from the romance of shipwreck discovery. Part comes from the sense that the object forces a correction in the story people tell about progress. But perhaps the deepest reason is that it makes ancient intelligence tactile. It is one thing to read that Greek astronomers understood cycles. It is another to see those cycles cut into bronze. The modern study of the mechanism also shows how history changes when tools change. Earlier generations were not foolish for failing to read what they could not see. Their limits were partly technological, but tools alone are not enough. Someone must ask the right questions. Someone must be willing to imagine that a corroded object from 200 BC might contain an advanced geared calculator. Evidence and imagination must meet carefully. Too little imagination leaves the artifact mute. Too much turns it into fantasy. The Antikythera mechanism requires the narrow path between them. Its study has also reshaped public understanding of ancient science. The device now appears in discussions of computation, astronomy, engineering, and the history of technology. It complicates the easy division between ancient wonder and modern reason. It shows that pre-modern people did not merely observe the world passively or explain it through myth alone. They measured, recorded, modelled, argued, and built. Their tools were different, their theories were different, and their societies were different, but the intellectual ambition is recognizable. At the same time, the mechanism reminds modern observers not to make the past too familiar. Calling it a computer is useful, but the word should not flatten its ancient identity. It did not belong to a culture of screens and circuits. It belonged to a world of engraved plates, hand-cut gears, civic festivals, divine calendars, elite education, and sea travel under uncertain skies. Its purpose was not modern calculation in general, but a specific orchestration of celestial and calendrical cycles. To understand it well is to let it remain ancient. What survives in the fragments has created a new kind of afterlife. The machine once predicted future events for its owner. Now it generates future research. Each improved scan, each new reading of an inscription, each proposed reconstruction extends its life in scholarship. The object that sank as cargo has become a centre of investigation. It draws engineers, historians, filmmakers, museum visitors, and curious viewers into the same question. How did they do this? And why did so much like it disappear? There is also a humility in the modern effort. Researchers can use machines vastly more powerful than anything available in antiquity, yet they remain dependent on ancient choices. They cannot ask the maker what he intended. They cannot recover the missing gears from imagination alone. They cannot know the owner's face. They can illuminate, model, compare, and infer. But the mechanism keeps part of itself. Its damage is not just physical, it is historical. That may be why it remains compelling even after so much has been learned. A solved puzzle often becomes ordinary. The Antikythera mechanism becomes more layered. The broad functions are clear enough to astonish, while the missing details continue to invite caution. It is neither total mystery nor complete possession. It stands in the middle, where the best historical objects often stand known enough to change understanding, unknown enough to keep thought alive. Modern eyes, then, do not conquer the ancient machine. They enter into a conversation with it. The scans reveal what the sea concealed. The reconstructions restore what corrosion froze. The debates honour what evidence cannot settle. And through all of it, the fragments remain small, dark, damaged pieces of bronze from a wreck. Their power comes from the distance between appearance and meaning. They look like ruin. They contain a cosmos. The Antikythera mechanism is called a computer because no simpler word quite holds it. It receives an input, processes relationships through an internal system, and produces displays that answer questions about time. But the word must be handled gently. It is not a modern computer displaced into antiquity. It is not digital, electronic, programmable, or universal. It does not calculate anything a user wishes. It calculates a particular cosmos, according to particular ancient theories. For particular human needs, its program is bronze, its memory is gear teeth, its screen is a set of dials, its power source is a hand. And still, the comparison matters. The mechanism proves that computation is older than electricity, older than silicon, older than the modern idea that machines think only when they hum with invisible current. It shows that a calculation can be embodied in shape. A number can become a wheel, a theory can become a ratio, a prediction can become a pointer creeping across an engraved scale. The Antikythera mechanism is a computer from before computers because it reveals the deeper human impulse behind computation, the desire to make patterns answerable. That impulse is not cold. It begins in watching. Someone sees the moon return but not perfectly. Someone notices eclipses repeat after long intervals. Someone compares calendars and seasons. Someone inherits records made by people already dead. Someone believes these observations can be organized. The machine is not born from abstraction alone. It is born from eyes lifted night after night, from records kept across generations, from sailors needing seasons, cities needing festivals, rulers fearing omens, philosophers seeking order, and craftsmen trusting that bronze can be made to obey a thought. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional force of the object. It is technically brilliant, but brilliance alone is not enough. It is ancient, but age alone is not enough. What makes it haunting is the combination of intelligence and loss. The mechanism is evidence that a world could build something astonishing and still fail to leave a clear path behind it. It is a surviving peak with most of the mountain hidden in cloud. We can see the summit, but not the roads that led there. Scholars still debate its exact birthplace, its maker, its owner, and parts of its original display. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the central truth is secure around 2,000 years ago. In the Greek-speaking Mediterranean, people made a compact geared machine that modelled celestial and calendrical cycles with extraordinary sophistication. It was not myth. It was not magic. It was not a fantasy of modern projection. It was ancient craft and ancient science, working together at a level the surviving record almost failed to preserve. The mechanism changes the past by making it less simple. It tells us that vanished cultures do not vanish evenly. Their temples may remain while their machines disappear. Their statues may survive while their workshops are forgotten. Their famous thinkers may be named while the artisans who made thought move are lost entirely. History is not a fair archive. It preserves stone, disaster, dryness, burial, chance. It loses the delicate, the useful, the melted, the ordinary, and sometimes the most advanced. The shipwreck near Antikythera is therefore not only the end of one voyage, it is the condition of one survival. Had the ship arrived safely, the mechanism might have been admired for a while, repaired, inherited, sold, broken, stripped, or melted down. It might have disappeared completely. Instead, catastrophe protected it. The sea ruined the machine but saved the evidence that it had existed. This is one of history's darker bargains. Sometimes we know a thing only because something went wrong. And so the Antikythera mechanism remains suspended between mastery and fragility. It was built to display order, but it survives through accident. It was made to predict cycles, but its own future was unpredictable. It compressed the heavens into a box, yet could not escape a storm. It may have helped its user think across decades, but it spent nearly 2 millennia in silence. It is a triumph of reason and a monument to loss at the same time. To call it a computer from 200 BC is useful because it shocks the modern imagination awake. But beyond that phrase lies something richer. It is a reminder that intelligence has appeared in many forms, under many skies, with many tools. It is a warning against assuming that what has not survived never existed. And it is an invitation to look at the ancient world not as a dim prelude to modernity, but as a landscape of its own brilliance, full of paths that did not all lead to us. The machine once turned in someone's hands, its pointers moved, its gears whispered against one another, the sun advanced, the moon changed, eclipse months approached, games returned, calendars folded into cycles, and the future became briefly visible in bronze. Then the ship sank. The case broke, the gears froze, and the cosmos inside the box went dark. Yet darkness was not the end. The fragments rose again, damaged but eloquent. Modern eyes learned to read them. Ancient hands, long gone, reached across the gap through the only language left to them: teeth, ratios, inscriptions, and motion remembered. The Antikythera mechanism does not solve the mystery of the ancient world. It deepens it, beautifully. It shows that the past was capable of more than we expected, and that time has taken more than we can ever know. In the end, the machine asks for humility. Not the humility of ignorance, but the humility of evidence. It asks us to admire what can be known, to admit what cannot, and to understand that civilizations are not measured only by what they leave standing. Sometimes they're measured by a broken object small enough to fit in a wooden case, found in the wreckage of a lost ship, still carrying inside it the memory of the sky. Word count 1090. The story of the Antikythera Mechanism ends quietly, not because the mystery has been exhausted, but because the object itself asks for quiet. It is small now, dark and fragile, separated from the hand that turned it and the world that understood it without explanation. Around it, the great noise of the ancient Mediterranean has faded harbours, markets, lectures, sacrifices, storms, games, arguments, footsteps on stone, ropes pulled tight on ships leaving at dawn. The machine remains. But everything that made it ordinary has gone. That may be its deepest lesson. Civilizations do not disappear only when their cities burn or their armies fail. They also disappear when their habits of making are no longer passed on, when their tools are melted, when their instructions are not copied, when their specialists die without students, when their most delicate achievements are mistaken for debris. The Antikythera Mechanism survived, but only barely. It came close to being nothing more than green corrosion in a museum drawer, a secret still sealed after the sea had already given it back. And yet it did survive. Enough bronze remained, enough letters remained, enough teeth remained for the pattern to return. Across 2,000 years, the machine still carries an image of human beings looking upward and refusing to leave the sky unexplained. They could not know everything. They were wrong about much, but they watched carefully, counted patiently, inherited knowledge, argued with the heavens, and built an answer that could turn. There is something tender in that survival. The mechanism no longer predicts eclipses for a living world. No sailor waits on its calendar. No festival depends on its dial. No owner leans close to admire its moving moon. But it still performs one final calculation. It measures the distance between what a civilization was and what remains of it. On the seabed near Antikythera, the ship lost its destination. In history, the machine found another. It became a messenger from a world where bronze could remember the heavens, and where time itself, for a moment, could be held in the hand. The last image is not of gears turning, but of stillness, a broken mechanism under soft museum light, its motion gone, its meaning returned, waiting like a small dark planet from an ancient sky.